It's a pleasure for me to introduce Slavka Halper. She is an exceedingly accomplished person with both a PhD and an MD and serves as professor of pathology for both the vet school and the medical partnership at UGA. Beyond that, she is also an enormously gracious and interesting person. Slavka grew up in the post World War II Jewish community in Prague. She escaped to the West in 1976, about 13 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall. She's been back to Czechoslovakia a couple times subsequent to that. Tonight, she will share some of her experiences, thoughts, and feelings about life in that part of the world, then and now, from a Jewish point of view. I know that there will be questions, and the easiest way to ask is to click on the chat function at the bottom of the screen. You can either address the question to everyone or to me, and I will read the question to Slavka when she finishes her presentation. And now we're all looking forward to what you have to say, Slavka.
Well, thank you for the wonderful introduction. Nobody said anything so nice about me so far, well, except for Ed. But he, okay, what else can I say? He's sitting right here. Anyway, I guess we went to Prague almost 2 years ago, and I got in touch also with some of my friends from Prague, and I was thinking about it, how weird it feels to come back after such a long time, and things have changed there somewhat, and but it still was a very weird feeling. And also, a lot thinking about my parents. They both died 5 years ago, and they were Holocaust survivors, and they were not in concentration camps, but they really never got over the Holocaust, especially my mother. And like, I grew up in Prague, and there were not so many Jews there, and things were very difficult after the Second War for everybody, not just Jews, but non-Jews too. And as is in the little write-up, most Czech Jews, the Prague Jews, they were all gone. They died in concentration camps or elsewhere. So most of the Jews there now, or at that time I lived there, came from other places, just like my parents. So my mother came from Slovakia, and my father grew up in Romania. And after the war, he came to Slovakia because he had relatives there. His father was from Slovakia, and he just found it so disgusting what was happening in Romania during the war, that he decided he couldn't stay there anymore. And my mother, she spent part of the war hiding in mountains with her parents and sister, and also found it very difficult to come back to Žilina. That's the town she grew up there, and so she left for Prague. But anyway, I'll start my presentation, and I'll share the screen. Hopefully I can find it. Yes, I did. So it's not long, and I'll just talk, and then you can ask questions. So being Jewish in Prague. So
Can they see the screen?
can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, anyway, this is kind of an iconic photo of Prague. You can see the river Vltava or Moldau.
So
And
Slavka, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not able to see anything. Is anyone else? Yeah, no. Are you sharing the screen?
yes, I am.
Yeah. Go back here.
I'll go back then.
Okay.
Okay.
Share the screen now. Try pressing that.
No, that's not. I have to press this. Well, maybe I'll do it then without the screen. I don't. Wait, no, that's not it.
Here, start. Right here.
Well, that's.
We got something.
No, that's the wrong thing.
That's just a list of files. It's
Mm.
here. You have to go to the PowerPoint. Can you see it now?
I see your Finder.
about now?
No, so if you go to share screen, you have to pick in Zoom the specific application that you want to share.
Right,
we
we
did that. We
cannot,
did that.
we
This is
cannot
weird.
share
No,
or
okay,
show
wait.
all windows.
No,
That's,
no.
yes.
We want, this is what we want to pick, this one.
Okay. Oh, is that better?
No.
No.
Oh, then I'll have to do without it. Okay, I'll just.
Oh, we got it. We
talk.
got it. Yes, it's there.
Okay, good. Okay.
Wonderful.
Anyway, so this is, what some of you know from Prague, and I'm sure quite a few of you were in Prague, and some of you told me how lovely it is there. It is lovely if you don't have to live there, to be my own, okay? But this is really a beautiful view. You in the background, you see the cathedral in the Prague castle and the Malá and the river, and that's all nice. And then, okay, that's where I grew up. Now my mom, she grew up in a town called Žilina, which is in northern Slovakia. And it's not Polish border, actually. It's not that far from Auschwitz. And this is the main square. What you see there is a church, okay? And then, they didn't, it was a small town and they grew up there. And my grandfather had a distillery and a liquor store. So they were fairly well off. And during the war, he lost everything. It became Aryan property, and they had to escape into mountains, and they lived there, I guess, sleeping on snow and being hunted by fascists and dogs. And she never talked much about it. But if you remember 2 years ago, the last Jewish festival here, the movie Interpreter about the Jewish guy, the old Jewish guy from Pressburg to Vienna, he wants to talk to the guy who was, hunting his parents and was responsible for death of many Jews. So he finds his son and they explore the area where everything happened during the war. And this, you can see the bottom, the river with the castle on top. That appeared in the movie. Okay, it was a documentary. And I found it very moving and very sad, I was really shaken up because this is very close to Žilina. I remember we were driving by. So it brought back all memories. And what he was describing, what happened during the war, that was what my mother was saying. Okay, so that's, and my grandparents are buried there, and that's their grave. So that's, I'll show you, this is my grandmother on the left, and that's her, I guess, identification card. She ended up in Theresienstadt, and she actually survived, but she died on the way back. I think she got typhoid, and there are some things that somehow something fell on her on the train, but she never made it alive coming back. Here you can see on the other half, this is my mom in the middle here on the left, little photo, flanked by her parents. That's after the war, and this is in Karlsbad. So my mom was about 21 there. Okay, on the next photo is my mother with her sister and brother-in-law. So they survived, and my grandfather got the business back until 1940. The communists came into power, and then he was nationalized. So he lost it twice, and obviously he wasn't in such great health after traipsing around the mountains in winter and sleeping on snow. He got a heart attack and died. So that's my mother's family. My father's family, they were devout Romanians. I don't know why.
That's where you are now. You need this one.
Oh, this one, okay. So you can see them here. My grandfather with the beret, Tausinger, he was from Slovakia. He was quite a character, but that's another story that would take too long. Next to him, you see the photo. My father is the man without a mustache, and then his brother, his sister, and his mother. It was not a happy marriage. So my father came to first to Žilina, had relatives there, met my mother. Then they went to university and they got married there. But also then his brother came and then his mother. My uncle, he became a well-known composer. His name was Jan Tausinger, and he then later became also the director of Prague Conservatory, which was a very important institution and very important post to be the director. The interesting thing is that, you know, he learned Czech, but not that well. He made mistakes, had a very strong accent, probably spoke like me. And that's, you know, that played a role. The, you know, people laugh at him. And, you know, he was a foreigner. My father learned actually, their first language was, by the way, Romanian. Okay, and second language German. So when my father came to Žilina, he spoke German with my mother. That was her first language. But he had to learn Czech very quickly because after the war, you didn't speak German on the street in Czechoslovakia. And he spoke without an accent. Then his sister, my aunt, Miriam, she became a dancer. She's the Romanian Martha Graham. She still lives, she's in Bucharest, and she now does choreography. She's 96. Her husband, my uncle, he's 97, and they are totally with it. We visited them 4 years ago. And this is my grandmother. She, you know, lived in Prague. And you can see on the bottom, there is the two brothers, their mom, and this is my aunt. And that's what I call adoration of the baby. That's the first grandson. Okay, my oldest cousin, Vladia or Vladimir. So now you met the family. And then my father, of course, you know, and my mother fell in love and they got married. And you can see a communist wedding. It does look a little bit like a funeral. It took place in February, okay? But you can tell it's very small. My mother is signing the document and everybody looks very serious. These are all, this is, you know, you couldn't have a Jewish wedding then, okay? This was in 1950. This was under communism. And people were executed just for being Jewish. So they had a very simple civil wedding, all dressed in dark because that's all they had. And this is my uncle, my father's brother. This is my mom's, on the other side, my mother's brother-in-law. You know, they do look like a little bit members of the mafia. I have to say that. It's like, you know, they were really characters. But as you can see, my parents were very happy, and they were still very happy at their 60th wedding anniversary in 2010. So when we were in Toronto and took them, I celebrated that. After that, that's okay. This is my mom as a student, and here she graduated from the university. That was also, I guess, shortly after that, a year later, also in winter. And this is with my dad. And I was born in 1953, so in the summer. Apparently, I was born a few months after Stalin died. And my father was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. He was very idealistic. My mom never went for that. My mom said when Stalin died, my father cried. He was heartbroken. Okay, but anyway, here I am. I want to show you this picture. As a baby, this is, you can see the old lady, that's my grandmother, my mother's mother. She was only, what, 53 or 54 there. She looks like she's much older, okay? because of her, I guess she had a heart disease, congestive heart disease, and the sojourn in the mountains during the war, and then losing her husband, and it was very distressing. And she died shortly after that, when I was 1 year old. So that's, and life was difficult. You couldn't have really Jewish life or even admit you were Jewish. So I was growing up, and apparently my father was asked by the Communist Party, by some officials, to change his name. His name was Tausinger. He said, "Oh, he'll be happy to do it. He'll change it to Cohen." And that didn't go too well. So, but he never changed his name. I have to say that my parents, they were not religious, okay, at all. I mean, they were somewhat anti-religious, so they knew more than other Jews there, but they were always proud and fierce Jews. Be the family and being Jewish, those were, I think, the two most important things for them. And so so I grew up in that spirit. When I was 4 months old, my father was drafted into the army. That he had a 4 months of baby, that didn't matter. He had to go. Okay, you didn't have much choice whether you were Jew or not. You can see him in uniform, but he was a musician. He actually originally studied cello at the Prague Conservatory, and then he became a journalist. Both my parents were journalists. So you can see my dad is in the uniform here, but here, because he was a musician, he had a little ensemble. I don't know if it was a chamber ensemble, but he said these were, I guess in those days we said gypsies, but now it's Romas. Okay, they were very talented, and my father just loved actually playing with them. And once in a while he was on furlough, so he brought the crew with him home. And my mom wasn't too happy about it because they lived in married student housing. We had one room there. That was our apartment. It was a 5th floor walk up in the married student housing. And we lived there, I guess, until I was in 2nd grade. Now you can see me there. We lived around the corner. I'm in front of my elementary school. And the little boy, I guess that was my first boyfriend. I don't want Ed to think that he's the only one, okay? That this is Pavel Yanda. And if I remember correctly, I think he had polio. And there wasn't so easy to be in in school there. Here kids run around, and they can run around during breaks. There we always had to sit still with our hands behind our backs and behave. And while we were also, taught about hygiene and brushing teeth, and first grade. And the teacher asked, "Is there somebody here who does not brush her teeth?" And I raised my hand. And I said, "Well, I never brushed my teeth," which wasn't true. But my parents were called to school and scolded that how are they bringing up a child in a communist country that she doesn't brush her teeth. So that's how we had to live. Okay, we were always under surveillance. So that then was as I mentioned, this was a married student housing, and the housing was very difficult in post-war Prague and still is. So we lived there for some years, and then when I was, I guess, 2nd grade, we moved to a newly built apartment. It, I guess, were apartment buildings further out. And this, you can see me here on the top I guess, among the boulders or the stones. And that was the landscaping they had for us, because they put us in those new apartments without doing anything about the landscape. So there were craters there. Okay, the streets were not finished. So that's where I am. My cousin came to visit. He fell into one of the craters. Unfortunately, there was still during working hours, so the workers were able to pull him out of out of one of the craters. But that's how we lived. It was a fifth floor walk-up. How, and I still remember we had a piano, the full movers schlepping the piano up the stairs. And below you can see, I am, I guess, third or fourth grade. This is my beginning of my brief political career in Prague. This is, I became a member of the Sparkles or Iskras. These are like young pioneers, okay? And I'm getting this little scarf and I'm very happy, okay, that I can be part of the crew. My sister is 4 years younger and she also started going to this group, but she never made it very far. Her political career was interrupted very early because one day she came home from the meeting and she said, well, the counselor said there is too much, there is a lot of noise in the group, like in a Jewish school. So my parents said, oh, really? Well, you are not going back to that group. And that was the end of her political career. So that was a common thing. It's a noise like in a Jewish school. The other thing the Czechs used is when something was very, they said, well, we paid non-Christian money, meaning it was very expensive. Okay, there were really two non-Christian groups living there. It's either Jews or Romas. The Romas never had anything. So guess what they meant by the non-Christian money, Jews. So, but overall, I would say that the people were not anti-Semitic. Well, anyway, my parents didn't tell us until I was maybe in third grade or so that we are Jewish, but they always talked about, is that person Jewish? Is he Jewish? Oh, those people went to Israel. So when they told me, I wasn't surprised. It didn't come as a surprise. And I was very proud of it. And I told happily the few friends I had that I'm Jewish. And I think the big thing when happened and enhanced by really Jewish identity was the 6-Day War. And I was 14 at that time. And, people actually became big fans of Israel in those days. And the regime was not doing so well anyway. But they, Jews were the underdog. Jews were not great fighters, but if somebody was fighting like this, they were able to support, give it moral support in those days. Well, anyway, when I was a child, there was a community there and synagogue open, but my parents were too afraid to go there. So we started going there when I was maybe 14 or 15. I remember we went for Rosh Hashanah. We were standing in front of the synagogue. And my parents said, oh, just be careful whom you don't talk too much. Some of these people, they are informers. Meaning, so I didn't know anybody anyway, but you can see on the right side of the slides us, that's me on top, and on the bottom with my sister and my mother at the Jewish community building. We call it Kahila or Kila. And you can see, okay, this is black and white photo, but that's how dark these buildings were all over Prague. They were all black in those days because they used coal for heating. So it was covered with soot that you can see their core. And behind this is the Altneu Shul. So that's right next together. And I'll show you how it, we used to go to, then my parents worked as journalists. And then after the Russian invasion in 1968, they lost their jobs and couldn't work as journalists. And they were employed by the Jewish community. My father was supervising the kitchen, which, there was Mrs. Bienenfeld. She actually knew what she was supposed to do. And my mom helped out in the, I guess, with the newsletter. And you went to we used to go there for lunches, and they had bashes for Purim and Hanukkah. And you walked in there, and you always could find some really old people with, numbers tattooed on their forearms. And those people were always kind of grumpy and unpleasant, but they were always there. And those were survivors who survived actually concentration camps. And not just that, they lost their entire families there, children, spouses, parents, and they just had nobody to be at home with. So they came to the community. So, they give us kids hard time that we are making too much noise, we are not behaving. Once you befriended them a little bit, they were very kind, and they really just, thrive talking, having some relationship with people. It actually was very, very sad to see these people. They were really human ruins. But there was always, it was not it was something nice in them, but it was really buried. At that time, we didn't have a rabbi there. There was a rabbi, Dr. Rabbi Feder. He lived in Brno, Brünn, which is, in the eastern part of Bohemia and Moravia. And he came for Seder. He came once, and I remember that he was there for Seder. He was 95. He also lost his family in a concentration camp. So that was, then I can show you how that's how the Altneu Shul and the community center of the Jewish city, town hall looks like. And it's really beautiful. I took those photos when we were there a couple of years ago. And we went in there this time, and it felt like there is a lot of security, so you cannot just walk in. But we went for lunch there as soon as we got to Prague, because I was hungry. And it felt like it before. The dining room was the same, the food was pretty much the same, except years ago I sat with in the student section. Now I sat with the other hackers like myself. So that was the difference. And I didn't know anybody there, but it was very, very similar feeling to it. And we went then for services for Shabbos to the shul and to the Altneu Shul. The golem, by the way, is supposed to be on top in the attic. And there was actually a very different feeling to it, because I didn't know anybody there. Many people actually left after we left, and there were people from, I guess, different towns of the Czech Republic, and also most of the people there were tourists. Okay, they just flocked there to see the shuls, because there's many of them, and they stay a couple of days and leave. It's not. I guess the community was decimated. Many people left in 1968 and later. So it looks like there is nice Jewish life. I don't think there is much of a real Jewish life. Okay, they have a rabbi, and it's still very difficult to get kosher food. There are a few restaurants, and kosher restaurants, and they are very expensive. They are actually much more expensive than a regular Jew or Czech person living in Prague could afford. We took my cousin there. He almost passed out when he saw the prices. Okay, it's not, and the waiters there, people who work there, they don't even speak Czech, because that's not for Czechs, that's for tourists. And it's not just the kosher restaurants. They have double, prices in other places as well. But anyway, that's the Altneu Shul, and that's where the main services are. What you see the main shul, and around it you see the lower roof. So that's the women's section. And it's, this is a medieval building built in the 13th century. So there is really for women, it's like, the windows are very small between the women's section and the main sanctuary. So you don't see really very much there. There are many other shuls, and I'm not going to show you all of them, but this is the shul we would go where my parents, we would stand outside. My parents would say, don't talk to anybody, there are muserers, informers. And we would go there. This is a beautiful shul. It's in Jerusalem Street, and so it's called Jerusalem Shul, and it's, I think, from the late 19th century. So it's basically a new building in Prague. Okay, and it was recently renovated. When we got there, actually it was closed. So, but that's how I found this online. Looks inside, and there, they don't call it Orthodox shul, but they call it Neolog shul. So what's the difference? There is no Reform shul, at least not yet in Prague, conservative. There's just regular Orthodox and Neolog, which means they have an organ and a choir. Okay, they have separate seating and everything. And they had services on the whole sanctuary, which is actually quite beautiful and large, on high holidays, and on Shabbos, like in a little shtibel, in a small room. But anyway, once I may have been Simchas Torah, we had a cantor in both shuls. The cantor from the Altneu shul, Mr. Victor Feuerlich, came for services to this shul, Jerusalem Street. And the cantor there, Mr. Bloom, said, well, it's either me or Mr. Feuerlich. If Mr. Feuerlich doesn't leave, I'm not going to lead the service. And guess what happened? Feuerlich didn't leave, and Mr. Bloom left. So that's, we are not any different wherever we are, okay? So that's the shul I wouldn't go to. So now we're talking about, yes, this is this Old Town Square, which is very close to the Jewish quarter. Okay, and what's you can see here, you can see the palace, and that's called Palace Kinski. There is, I guess, an actress, Natasha or Natalie Kinski, and that's the same family, okay? Probably some aristocrat. And that's where Kafka and his family lived. The church behind it is Saint Tin, or I guess our old lady. It's a Catholic church, okay? I call it Tinski Hram, Tin Cathedral. And there are, Tycho de Brahe, the astronomer, astrologist, is buried there. And also, and he lived during the time of Maharal, Rabbi Yehuda Alev ben Bezalel, the creator of Golem. And Maharal is a big figure in Prague, not just Jewish Prague, just he's the urban legend, okay? Prague couldn't be Prague without Rabbi Maharal and Golem. That's how it is. And the legend is that Maharal and the Habsburg Emperor and Czech King Rudolf II, plus Tycho de Brahe and possibly Kepler, were running around in Prague trying to make gold with the alchemists near the Prague castle. What, but that's true, I don't know, but I think he was very esteemed by the emperor. He probably had some contact with Tycho de Brahe, and actually Kepler lived there too, so he didn't die there. The emperor died in Prague as well, actually, a little bit later. But anyway, this is more, I'm sorry for the parties there. They made it to Prague, and that's in front of the Palace of Kinskis. And the old time square was, that has changed a lot, because now there are thousands or hundreds of tourists just sitting there on the ground, and I don't know what they're waiting for, but that's how they spend their days there. So that's where Kafka lived with his parents. So he obviously came from a well-off family. When I lived there, Kafka was not popular. He was kind of forbidden. Okay, he was a Jew. He spoke German, and I need to tell you this about the Czech Jews. The Czech Jews did not speak Yiddish. Okay, the Slovak Jews didn't speak Yiddish either. My mother's first language I mentioned was German. And for the Czech Jews, the big question was, the existential question was to speak Czech or to speak German. Okay, and Kafka, Max Brod, Franz Werfel, Gustav Mahler, they all spoke German. They didn't know much Czech. There was a whole big group of Czech Jews who did speak and create in German, in Czech. Many of them, were great writers, but they wrote in Czech. And many of these people died in concentration camps. And there were also musicians who died in concentration camps. So Kafka was one of the German speaking Jews. And it was very easy to live in Prague and not to speak Czech. The university was divided into Czech and German parts. So that's, how it was. And in the 19th century, actually, Czech language became almost extinct because, Bohemia of Austria and was kind of revived by Czech romanticism and enlightenment. And there were these first Czech authors. We had to read them in school. And I tell you, it was pretty awful literature. Okay. But we had to read it. But, then it recovered. So then, of course, after the Velvet Revolution, Kafka is now very popular in Prague, and that's, I guess, in his honor. That wasn't there when I lived there, so I guess it's a money-making thing. Now they have conferences, and he's the best thing. It's something like in Poland, and they have all these Jewish things without Jews, so they have now Kafka without really Kafka. So while I was in Prague, I also met, again, which I haven't seen in many, many years. This is with one of I have 5 cousins there. This is one of them, Igor. This is the son of the composer. He's also very talented. And we met, and with other cousin, we went to the new Jewish cemetery. Okay, Maharal and the many other old rabbis I buried in the cemetery behind the Altneu Schule. Now, of course, after a while, they ran out of space. So there is a large new Jewish cemetery on the outskirts of Prague. It's not outskirts anymore. It's in part called Vinohrady. It's a newer part. It's a middle class section, bourgeois section. You can see it. It's the turn of the century architecture, so-called, we called it secession. It's very nice, but it's much simpler than what you can see in the center of Prague. So here I am with my cousin. We are going to the cemetery, and Kafka is buried there as well. The cemetery is very large, and I think Ed was actually, he found it too much because there are all these plaques there of people who are not buried there but died in the war. Now here I'm at my grandmother's grave. It's my father's mom. So she died in 1968. So that's the first time I saw the grave after I left Prague in 1976. In the small black photo, you can see, that's me there with the white shirt. We kind of, from the community, a group of, as a volunteer to clean up the cemetery a little bit because, it was overgrown and they didn't put much money into it. Now it actually looks quite nice, but, it is still just a cemetery. And the ones who, if you're a little bit familiar with the Beth Jacob synagogue and the other buildings there is I guess, I think it's a Kollel building called after Peček. So that was a Jewish Czech family of Czech industrialists, Peček, and they had a big palace or mansion in Prague. And they have a big mausoleum in the cemetery, which we didn't see. But the Czech palace, ironically became, I guess, a headquarters for Gestapo during the war. And after the war, it became actually headquarters for the interior police or the secret police and they tortured political prisoners there. Well, anyway, what you can see here, I'll show you a little bit more. On the left, you can see, and that tells you how important figure Maharal was. This is a statue of Maharal, and on the side is a woman begging for something, and notorious. But the point is, the building is that's the city hall. That's the new city hall in Prague. And in the corner there, you can see that's right in the part of the city hall, the statue of Maharal. That's actually very close to the Alt Neue Schule. Okay, so that's, really, you cannot imagine Prague really without the Jewish community there. And in the same square, there is another building, which I never paid much attention to it. And I have a kind of a personal story about it here. The lady there, that's one of my cousins. That's from my mother's side. She's a distant cousin. Our great grandmothers were, I think, sisters. Well, she's not Jewish anymore, and we went to medical school together. And she became actually very prominent. She became a hospital administrator, and later she became a Minister of Health for a while and member of the European Parliament. He's her husband. He's I guess, architect and sculptor, and his father and grandfather were also architects and designers. And they basically, one of the buildings next to the city hall, his grandfather or father designed the interiors, that was the private apartment for the mayor of Prague and for distinguished guests. And it's something incredible. That was done between the war, during the so-called First Republic. And this is not the Jewish stuff, but it's fascinating. That's not open to public right now. So I felt very privileged that they took us on a private tour, and this is all handmade, inlaid wood, and it's absolutely fantastic. I think Abraham can appreciate it the most. So these are kind of more on top. You can see they had basically two apartments, the nice, one for the mayor and one for his guests. And now they still use it for guests. The mayor doesn't live there. On the bottom, that's, I guess, a ballroom or huge dining room. And I think they use it once in a while. It's an absolutely amazing experience to be there. I never knew that existed. I mean, you have all these buildings that you don't pay much attention to it. Then we went a little bit out of Prague because another cousin of mine had some back problems, and you know that Carlsbad and places like this, these are big spas, and people still go there for treatment. Okay, so my cousin was sent to a town called Bechyně, which is not far from Prague. It's very small, but they have spas. And not just that you go there, it's paid by his health insurance. So he spent 3 weeks there basically being on vacation, taking his bath and drinking water and resting. So we went there, and this what we found. It's a small town of 5,000 people. what you see there, this apparently was a synagogue on the left. And it's very small. We couldn't go in, it was closed. Okay, now apparently it's information for tourists or something. And of course, I don't think there are any Jews living there. But this is kind of typical that, okay, there used to be ghetto in Prague, and I don't know about the other places, but Jews lived in very small, in these small towns all over, I guess, Czech Republic or Czechia and then Slovakia. And they were not really ghettos, but that's how they lived. And there are many synagogues like this all over the place there. If you travel, if you ever go there, go to these small towns because there are no tourists there, for example. So they don't even take credit cards in restaurants there because there are no tourists there. We took my cousins for a lunch there. They had the lunch and it cost us what couple of bucks. Okay, it was amazing and they were very happy. But these were all these small Jewish communities there, and I have a book which I'm not going to show, but with photos of various Jewish small cemeteries in Czech Republic. And, it was really a beautiful trip. Then we took the train back to Prague, and that was also a lot of fun. And I'm back in Prague now, and that's, I like to end this so you can make it to the Oprah interview of Meghan and Harry. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Well, you left.
And I can tell you why we left. My parents lost their jobs, and it wasn't just that. My mom, she was the head or the chair of the, I guess, club of freelance journalists. So what she did when people lost their jobs, you had to be employed, otherwise you were paramount in jail. So she gave them a stamp in our identification papers that they had some kind of a position. So the secret police once in a while called my mom for interviews or interrogations to the prison and we never knew whether she would come back or not. And one day in the middle of the night, there is knock on the door and my sister gets up and says, "Oh, mailman came." Well, I knew it wasn't mailman. It was secret police. It was about 3 p.m. And they took my father away. Of course, we were all shocked. And they had a great time, the two police guys. They enjoyed themselves a lot. They did release my father after a few hours. So, and then, I was in medical school. And that wasn't so easy either. We had to take classes like history of Communist Party, because how could you become a doctor without knowing the history of the Communist Party? And then we took a class called Scientific Communism. Until today, I have no idea what that means. Okay, but we had the class met at 7 a.m. And the instructor started talking about the people who were evicted from the Communist Party. My father was kicked out and some of the other parents of the students too. So they said, these people are really traitors and stuff like that. And we got very upset and started discussing it with her. She said, well, there's too much noise in the class. I will have to let the dean know what's going on here. So that was not easy. And in those days, I already wanted to do research. And I was working at the Genetic Institute a little bit. And they said, I should stay up and I guess do something what would be like PhD. Well, the year before, a few months, I guess, before we left or so, the director there told me that he was told that I wouldn't be able to stay because I was Jewish. So there was a big incentive actually for us to leave because that's how it was. And I mean, he said he was very embarrassed. He said one of his grandparents was Jewish. I mean, that feels like Nuremberg laws here. It's so that's how it was. So, but we did have the community there, and we would go there and had our Hanukkah parties and the young people. So, and I'm in touch with, but I have to say, once I left, I never had any regrets. I never really looked back, and I was glad to go back and see it. But I was also glad to leave. I have to say, it's not my home anymore. So, and there's another funny thing. I think my Czech is still good, but I think the Czech these days sounds a little bit different. It's the people who live there, they speak much faster. They actually use a lot of English words. We always use words like weekend and things like this, but even more now. So I don't know if I said everything I planned to say, but if you have any questions, I hope that.
Well, thank you, Slavka. That was wonderful.
Well, thank you. So
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I was really glad I can share this with you.
It's wonderful, and we appreciate it. And there are a couple questions. One is from Marilyn and Elliot. They say, very interesting talk. You mentioned your father was a communist and idealist. Was there a time when he lost his idealism? And do you remember what precipitated that?
Well, he did actually. I think it was maybe gradual. I think it happened a lot, with I guess, the official anti-Semitism. And then during the 6 Day War, you can't imagine how Israel was described in newspapers. And there were what we were taught, like there were three types of enemies. There were American imperialists, German revanchists, there be the Germans who want to take back Sudetenland, and Zionists. Okay, so who were the Zionists, right? And then the 6 Day War, I think that was a big thing for all of us. That kind of and then then the Russians came in 1968, and that was very shocking because things really were very good in Prague in the before the invasion. Well, I guess that's why they invaded. And my parents basically became dissident, and they wanted the members of party to, I guess, to make a pledge of allegiance basically to the Communist Party, which many people refused, including my father. So he was basically expelled from the party.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a gradual, and by the time, I guess by then nobody actually believed any of that stuff. Some people supported it and worked for the regime because, of advance, they wanted to get ahead and get a good position. So,
Indeed. Janet Shetton wrote a question. Had you been in a synagogue before you knew you were Jewish? What did your parents think about your move to the USA? Those are two questions.
okay, well, no, I wasn't in the synagogue as a little kid. I think I'm not sure how often the services were. I don't know. I was too little, and I think my parents were just afraid to go. Okay, then then around 1967, people, things started, there was a little bit of relaxation. And so they and they thought actually it was important for their children to go to the synagogue and, get something really Jewish. And I started going not just to the synagogue, but they had programs for young people. So I was going to those things.
There was a second question as well, but let me toss one in so you can answer both of them. You mentioned that you escaped from Czechoslovakia. How did that unfold? And then Janet asked, what did your parents think about your subsequent move to the United States?
Well, we left, I guess, my mom and my sister left first. They left for Canada because, my mother had a sister there who left in 68. I have to make it short because it gets complicated. In the meantime, my father was able to secure an exit visa to go to what was then Yugoslavia. He still knew some people who didn't know he wasn't a member anymore. So we got the visa to go to Yugoslavia. And from there, we took a train to Vienna, which was easy to do. And in Vienna, we went to Hayes and joined distribution committee. And they moved us to Rome for 6 months. And then we came to Canada. I forgot what the second question
How
was.
did your parents do?
Mine was very difficult for my parents. My mom knew some English. She did some translations, but my father didn't. And, my father, it was actually, we came to Toronto. They didn't know the language and they were completely lost. And I remember my first impression, it was their impression too of Toronto. We got there from Rome. We flew in January 77. And Rome is a beautiful city, balmy winter, and we get to Toronto. And all we saw was just snow and these small buildings. It didn't look nice. I thought, oh my gosh, what are we doing in this place? And it was particularly difficult for my parents because they were used to going to concerts and they had their friends. In Prague, you can go to several concerts almost every day. And they were lost actually. They got kind of used to it, and they went to visit Prague once or twice, but they were not so young. They were 50 when they came to Toronto. So for them, it was really very, very difficult. My father worked as a security guard in the museum there. And my mom, she worked first as a secretary, then she had a small kind of agency, domestics, but it was not the same. They never became part of the community. The synagogues here, they found it very difficult to participate. They couldn't afford to pay the membership, so they felt kind of excluded.
Yeah.
But we actually had very good friends. They helped us because that was just by chance. I think a year or two before we left, a young student from Toronto came to the community. My father worked there. The student, I guess he kept kosher and Shabbos, had no place to go. So he brought him to our place, brought him food from the community, he stayed with us. And when my mom got to Toronto with my sister, his parents actually helped us. They were incredible. So that was, I guess, like Beshet, it really was a miracle. They were absolutely fantastic. So, and they lived in a Jewish area. Later they moved because they complained that the area is not Jewish enough. So they moved into a more Jewish area, and then they complained that these Orthodox Jews are around in these black hats, but they had to be in a Jewish area. That was my parents. So.
I'm going to ask you just one more question, and then we'll open it up for people to say hello if they want for a moment, and we'll move on. This is a question from Zach, and he was interested in your observations about sort of the culture today. You and your family have such a direct connection to the Holocaust, but each new generation gets farther and farther away and don't have any connection. How do you feel about Jews being connected to Holocaust these days?
Well, I felt like I grew up in the shadow of Holocaust. I wasn't affected, but it was always there. Actually, my parents, even in the last few months of their lives, where mentally they were not quite with it, they talked about Holocaust and anti-Semitic. It never left them. Okay, and I think I'm very sensitive. I avoid movies about Holocaust. I find it very difficult.
Yeah.
I think our kids, they do have, I guess, connection being Jewish and to Holocaust through our oldest son Yehuda. Some of you know him. He was in Prague a couple of times to give lectures, and so he went to the cemeteries and with my cousins, and so it comes, but yeah, it is not the same. Okay, I came as a refugee into Canada. I don't feel as a refugee anymore, and my children, they're not refugees. I don't consider them refugees, and they're not going to be supported by a UN agency. All right, they are not refugees anymore.
I got you. And not only do I understand you and get you, I want to thank you. Thanks so much. And Rabbi, would you unmute people so they can say hello for a minute, and we'll say thanks again and call it a night.
Absolutely. And Slavka, toda rabah. Thank you so much.
Well,
And
thank
everyone-
you for having me. It's so nice to meet everybody because we almost never.
Oh, Slavka, you're muted. I'm sorry, because I just gave people the ability to unmute, but I had to mute people to do that.
Oh, I see. No, I just say it's nice to see people. We don't see many people. We had our first visitors over the weekend. Our middle son Daniel came with one of his daughters because he got vaccinated. We got vaccinated. He got vaccinated. They called. He's coming, and he came. And that was so wonderful. And these were our first guests after a year. So it's great to see all of you.